Oh, hi. This is not a hula hoop. This is a Serpentine belt, and it goes in this 2002 Toyota RAV4. The second generation RAV4 has one belt that drives the alternator, water pump, AC compressor, and power steering pump. I recommend lifting the car by the frame rail about 1 foot in from the edge of the car and spreading out the load with a block of wood. Set the jack stand up under the steel subframe by the lower control arm. I'm using an air impact wrench to remove all the lug nuts. With the right front wheel out of the way, the next thing blocking the Serpentine belt is the plastic splash guard. Spray a little lube on the clips and bolts to make them easier to take out. Pry the center of the push pin out with a flathead screwdriver to remove it. Take out 2 more bolts here. The splash guard has 3 more bolts and 1 push pin under the front bumper. Before we get started on the belt, check out this wrench. It's thin and long and has both 12 and 14 millimeter ratcheting ends. It will make your life a lot easier when working on belts. Link in the video description below. The belt tensioner has 3 bolts holding it. Let's loosen them up a bit first. Place a long breaker bar and a 19 millimeter socket above and just in front of the tensioner pulley. Use a jack handle for more leverage and slowly push the tensioner toward the back of the car. Once the belt is loose, use a long flathead screwdriver to push it off the tensioner pulley. Now we can finish pulling the belt out of the car. Reach in from above and get the belt off the alternator and water pump. Finally, get it off the power steering pump, and it's out. Let's head over to my favorite source for low quality parts, Autozone. Okay, they recommend replacing the belt and the tensioner. These Duralast parts are some real junk sometimes. I wouldn't trust that pulley not to fall apart. This Continental brand kit might be a bit better, but I'm sure it's still worse quality than original Toyota parts. I'm just going to buy the belt. The old tensioner on the car probably has more life left in it than the new parts from Autozone. Here we go. The Continental belt for the car with the manual transmission. I'm not replacing the tensioner today, but I'll show you how to do it anyway. Remove the lower nut and the upper bolt. The only problem is, the bolt is too long and I can't get the tensioner out from between the engine and the frame of the car. I'm putting it back in place and threading the bolt in so it's not jammed up against the frame. Next step, support the engine using a jack and a wood block under the oil pan. The motor mount will need to come out. Start by removing 1 nut from under the mount. The other name for this piece is the insulator. It insulates the people in the car from the engine's vibrations. I'm breaking the bolts loose by hand, then removing them with my impact driver. There's another bolt and a stud with a nut hidden behind the engine mount here. With all the bolts removed, we can pull the vibration damper out of the car. Lower the engine on the jack. Now there is enough room to get the belt tensioner out. Let's take a look at this old tensioner. There is no play in the bearing and it spins freely. If I clamp it to something solid, you can hear the bearing makes a bit of noise. It spins great, but sounds like there isn't enough grease in the bearing. The bolt that holds the bearing is weird. It's like a large inverted Torx that's about 13 millimeters. I don't have a socket like that, so I'll try vice grips. It's also tapered, so the vice grips just slip off. Maybe I can lube the bearing somehow. I'll spray some Tri-Flow on both sides. And it's exactly the same as before. They really don't want you messing with this pulley. You can't unscrew it, and it's sealed up really well. I'll just clean the lube off it now. It's fine. I'm sure this tensioner will go another 100,000 miles, no problem. Let's check the other pulleys. The AC compressor spins fine, and the water pump is okay. The power steering pump turns easily, but this other pulley is stuck. Just kidding, that's the engine. It's harder to turn. The alternator spins fine too. Good. If any of those pulleys are grinding or hard to turn, you'll need to fix them before you install the new belt. Now I'm reinstalling the tensioner back into its place. Push the end of the tensioner over the stud at the bottom, then thread the long bolt in as far as you can with your fingers. Install the nut and tighten the bolt down just a little bit with the wrench. Don't torque it down yet because the tensioner will need to pivot a little bit when installing the belt. Make sure the new belt is the same length as the old belt. Yep, I got the right one. Drop the new belt in from the top and install it on the alternator pulley first. Wrap the belt around the water pump, then the AC compressor. From under the car, wrap the belt around the power steering pump and crank pulley. Then the belt goes around the tensioner pulley. Use the breaker bar to move the tensioner down and slip the belt over the pulley. Use the same breaker bar to turn the crank pulley clockwise. Look at all the pulleys to make sure the belt isn't going to fall off. Make sure all 3 bolts on the tensioner are tight. Now it's time to reinstall the motor mount. Lift the engine with the jack, then set the mount into place. Thread the 5 bolts in by hand first, then you can use an impact driver to save some time. You can't really tell how tight a bolt gets with the electric impact, so it's a good idea to do the final tightening by hand or with a torque wrench if you want to be a nerd about it. Remember to reinstall the 1 nut under the motor mount. Get the jack out of the way and start the engine. Okay, everything works and the belt didn't fall off. If you install the belt wrong, the engine will shred it and you'll have to start over with a new belt. Let's get that tire back on. I like to sit on the floor and use my feet to lift the wheel into position. Start the lug nuts by hand so you don't cross-thread them. It's okay to use an electric impact because it's weak and won't over-tighten the lug nuts. Don't use an air impact wrench to install lug nuts. I'll torque them later. It's a good idea to shake down the front end of the car. Try to move the wheel side to side and up and down. I want to make sure the tie rods for the steering and the ball joints on the control arm don't have any play. The suspension on this car isn't falling apart, so I can finish up by taking it off the jack. Don't forget to use a torque wrench on the lug nuts. Oh, and I forgot that plastic thing. You can install it when the wheel is on the car. Just turn the steering wheel all the way to the right so you can reach it. What should I do with this old belt? Well, I could start eating at Olive Garden regularly, and I could wear this belt. I would look like a marshmallow. Did you know I have many other RAV4 videos? You should check them out if you haven't yet. Thanks for watching.